Every child has gifts. You can learn to draw them out. But what can become really tricky is that there are some smatterings of information that are really important for you to know from the play therapy world and from the sensory processing or occupational therapy world, as well as the really standard traditional brain science and child development world. How do we navigate situations with kids when there's big feelings and big emotions is ultimately what I'm going to boil that down to. So when we're looking at what's beneath kids' behavior today, I want to answer that question of where are they getting stuck? Well, we always know the reason why, not necessarily. But when we understand where they're getting stuck and what our reaction to that tends to be, it will help us move the needle to make a difference so that they're stuck less and we know what impact our reaction is having on a child. That can be for better or for worse. So you might find some impacts that are really positive. Yay, that's part of the goal of today. But you're also going to see some things where you unintentionally are impacting your child and maybe like shooting yourself in the foot, having an influence that's creating more stuck feelings. Now, obviously, you've thought about this before. You're like, how do I get this to stop? How do we make this better? This just needs to go away. Like we're always thinking something like that when kids are having this type of a moment. But what I want to alert you to is that the other thing that we're trying to move children toward, and this gets in the way of fire, is we're trying to move them towards upstairs brain skills. So we're trying to move them into things like solve this problem, pay attention, engage, manage your behavior, have self-regulation. But when there's fire in the brain and I use one of these skills, I'm going to tell you a real scenario here, and you're going to hear yourself in it in some way. I think so. If I'm trying to use these upstairs brain skills, they don't work because they sound like this. Charlie, Charlie, what could you do right now instead of screaming, I hate you? No, not going to work in the moment. This kid's not going to be able to communicate with Charlie. Check my eyes, look at me when I'm talking to you, right? So we see these kids where my kid's only 4, so it's not that long ago that as a 2-year-old, I'd be like, grab him by the chin, Mason, mommy's talking to you. But when we're trying to engage kids in this upstairs brain mode and they're distracted or they have big feelings, us engaging their attention doesn't actually calm fire in the brain. So you want to understand about fire in the brain because it begins to give us clues around what are the things that we're doing that actually and unintentionally contribute to more fire. But you want to know too that there are some kids who I call intense brain kids that are more prone to fire in the brain. And again, there can be lots of reasons for this, but ultimately what the symptoms look like or the signals look like is that they try to rule the roost. Their behaviors appear controlling or demanding. You feel like you're walking on eggshells and how the day unfolds revolves around them. You also notice that the triggers for that fire can be confusing where you're like, how did this set you off today? Is it the smell coming out of the cafeteria? Is it time of day? Maybe your child has some sensory processing challenges and the tag on the back of the shirt bothers them, or they're a neurotypical 3-year-old and the seam isn't lined up on the toe of the sock just right. Or maybe you have a 12-year-old who usually eats oatmeal for breakfast and heaven forbid you ate the last banana and suddenly today they come down the stairs and they want the banana. So you're like, what sets you off? I'm trying to stay 3 steps ahead of you and I can't. I'm constantly putting out fires. So if that's happening where you're feeling confused about what's causing or leading to these outbursts, this child might have intense brain wiring and the reactions are atypical. And not to make a judgment statement there, but atypical meaning it's intense. Given the low significance of the situation, you might be like a mom of a 7-year-old who like required that the socks came on and off 5 times every morning to get them lined up just right. Like that doesn't seem like a really typical reaction. It takes a long time. It's really frustrating. We're like, what's going on? Is it my parenting strategy? Is it my kid? And so the reaction is really intense for what you would expect in the situation. But here is the kicker. The kicker is when you have a child with more intense emotional or behavior reactivity, if you match them with fire, you know what your kid's going to do, right? Like they're going to escalate and things are going to get worse. So you can't fall into a default style for some of us are raised in a culture or a nation or a family community that has leaned heavily on authoritarian parenting. An authoritarian style is one where it's kind of stereotypically the parent says, I am the parent, you will obey me, and they are not flexible to their kids' needs. You want to know if your child has more of this fight or flight stress response and this intense brain wiring because it's going going to influence how you're reacting to them. If you know that they have more of that downstairs brain activation, it might create some space for a little bit more compassion or a different tool for you to use in that moment. Because one of the tools that we don't want to use is we don't want to just slip into this thinking that my child is only trying to control me, be defiant, and manipulate me. Instead, what I want you to understand is in the brain science world, they literally talk about the little scientist in the brain. Like that's a part of child development.